We all talk about the cloud, like it's this magical, abstract thing floating up in the sky. But what if I told you it has a real-world address? In fact, it has hundreds of them. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the actual physical blueprint of the AWS cloud.
So let's just start with the biggest question of all. Think about it. When you upload a photo, launch a website, or stream a movie, where is all that stuff physically going?
Well, the answer is, it's not magic. It's a very real, and frankly, absolutely massive global network of secure buildings just packed to the gills with powerful computer hardware. And getting your head around the map of this network, that is the first and most critical step to building anything powerful and reliable on AWS.
So our journey begins from like a 30,000-foot view. We're looking at the whole world map, and this is where we run into the biggest, most fundamental piece of the entire AWS puzzle, the AWS region.
So what in the world is a region? It's actually super simple. It's a specific geographic spot on the planet. We're talking about real places like Northern Virginia in the US, Ireland, Mumbai, or Singapore. Each one is its own distinct cluster of data centers, totally separate from the others. So when you go to launch a server, you are literally picking where on Earth it's going to live.
Okay, but how do you pick the right home for your application? Well, it really just boils down to 4 key questions you got to ask yourself. First up, compliance. Are there data laws, like GDPR in Europe, that say your data has to physically stay inside certain borders? Second is latency. How close is this region to your actual users? Third, services. That awesome new AWS feature you want to use, is it even available in that region yet? And last but not least, price. And this is a fun one. The cost for the same service can actually be different from region to region, all because of things like the local price of land and power.
And I gotta say, that latency point, it is a huge deal. I mean, it's just basic physics, right? The farther away something is, the longer it takes for the signal to get there. So if most of your users are in India, it makes a massive difference to put your servers in Mumbai instead of, say, Virginia. The whole thing will just feel way faster. So the takeaway here is simple. Build close to your customers, always.
All right, so we've picked our city on the world map. Now let's zoom in. Let's get a closer look at how these cities are actually constructed. Because inside every single region, AWS has built these, well, you can think of them as independent fortresses. They're designed to handle pretty much any disaster, and they're called availability zones. So, an availability zone, or AZ for short, is basically one or more totally separate data centers inside of a region. The city analogy really works here. If the region is the city, then each AZ is like a separate super secure building on the other side of town. They're close enough to talk to each other super fast, but they're also far enough apart that if something bad happens to one, like a fire, a flood, or a power outage, the others are totally fine.
Now this is where it gets really cool. Check out this number. Every single AWS region has a minimum of 3 of these isolated availability zones. This isn't some add-on you pay for. It's the absolute bedrock of how AWS builds everything for reliability, right from the very start.
So what's the secret sauce? How are they so resilient? It's all about total, complete independence. Each AZ has its own power, its own cooling, its own network connections, even its own physical security. Because they're so isolated from each other, an application can literally survive one of them going completely dark, and your users, they won't even have a clue.
And this right here, this brings us to what is probably the #1 most important rule for building on AWS. Do not put all your eggs in one basket. You have to spread your application across at least 2, and ideally all 3 of the AZs. When you do that, you're building a system that just assumes things will fail and knows how to handle it. That, my friends, is the secret to high availability.
Okay, so we've got our map of regions, our cities. We've got our AZs, our fortresses inside them. But there's another layer to this blueprint. See, not every tool you use in AWS plays by the same rules. Some are what you'd call local citizens, and others, they're more like global travelers.
Let me explain. Some AWS services are regional. This means when you create, say, an EC2 instance, which is just a virtual server, or an RDS database, it physically lives in the one region you picked. It's tied to that location. But then you have global services. A great example is IAM, which is how you manage users and permissions. When you create a user there, that user exists everywhere. Same with Route 53 for your domain names. You set it up once, and it works across your entire account, no matter the region.
And hey, let me give you a pro tip here that will save you from a minor heart attack later on. This happens to everyone. Let's say you launch a server in the Ireland region. Then you click the drop-down in the corner and switch your view to the Mumbai region.
Suddenly, poof, your server is gone. But don't panic, it didn't disappear. You just have to be looking in the right city to see the things that live there.
Okay, I think we've got the theory down, right? Regions are the cities, AZs are the fortresses inside, and services are either local to one city or they're global. So now for the fun part. Let's put all these pieces together and see how this works in a real-world scenario.
So here's our challenge. Imagine we're building a new web app, and it's going to be big with lots of users in India and lots of users in Europe. Our goal is pretty straightforward. We need to make sure the app is super fast and super reliable for everyone, no matter which side of the world they're on.
Okay, so let's break down how we'd build this. First, for our DNS, we'd use Route 53. It's a global service, and it acts like a smart traffic director. It'll automatically see a user is coming from Europe and send them to our servers in Ireland. If they're in India, it sends them to our servers in Mumbai. Now those servers, the EC2 instances, those are regional. We have one set running in Ireland and a completely separate set in Mumbai. For managing who gets access, we use IAM. That's global, so we set up our developers' permissions just once, and it works everywhere. And to make things even faster, we use CloudFront, another global service, to store things like images and videos physically closer to all our users around the world. See how it all fits together? You've got these global services orchestrating the regional ones.
Wow, okay, we've covered a ton of ground here, right? We've gone from this huge global view all the way down to the nitty-gritty of how a single data center works. So let's just take a second and lock in the most important takeaways.
If you remember nothing else, remember these 4 things. First, regions are your physical footprint on the map. Second, availability zones, or AZs, are how you build for fault tolerance, how you make sure your app doesn't go down. Third, when you pick a region, always think about those 4 things: compliance, latency, services, and cost. And finally, number 4, you've got to know if the service you're using is regional or global. That little detail makes all the difference.
So there you have it. The cloud isn't just this vague, floaty concept anymore, right? It's a real, physical map of cities and fortresses with its own set of local and global rules. You now have the fundamental blueprint you need to build powerful, reliable apps that can reach anyone, anywhere on the planet. So now the only real question is, what are you going to build?